Hi guys, and welcome to another Sunday slot for teens or anyone else who wants to join us and watch together and learn together. This week we're going to be thinking a little bit about growing with the weeds, and I'm trying to save the planet and do bits and bobs on my iPad instead of printing out reams and reams of paper. So bear with me while I get to grips with technology if it all goes terribly wrong. But the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to do a little quiz that is called Weed or Not. So it's really, really simple. So you might want a piece of paper or you might be able to remember in your head. So I've got 6 pictures of flowers, although you might think they're flowers. And you have to decide if they are a weed or not. Super simple. So your first one is this. Is this a weed or not? You don't have to tell me what flower it is, but just if you think it is a weed or not a weed. Great, that's our first one. Number 2. Do you think this is a weed or not a weed? Fabulous. Number 3. Weed or not weed? That is the question. Okay. Number 4. Kind of spiky. Weed or not weed? Great, you're doing super good. Number 5. This funny looking little guy here. Do you think it's a weed or not a weed? And you've almost done it. Number 6, home run. These nice guys here. Number 6, are they a weed or not a weed? So, hopefully you've had a little go with that and you've decided if they're weeds or not. So let me tell you, the first one, so the first white flower, this is called bindweed, I think, so I'm told, and they are easy to pull out from the ground. They can be very difficult to untangle from other plants they have wrapped themselves around. So this in fact is a weed. So number 1 is a weed. Number 2 was not a weed. This is a yellow poppy, apparently. Number 3, though a very beautiful flower in the woodland, I think we've all seen them, bluebells are weeds that can take years to get rid of. The glossy foliage repels weed killer spray, so you'll have to just keep digging them out, basically. So really beautiful, but actually a weed, apparently. Number 4, I'm not going to say the name of the plant because I'm really worried I'm not going to pronounce it right, but number 4 was not a weed. It can cause mild stomach upset if ingested though, so don't go eating any of the number 4 flower. Number 5, it's not a weed. It's called a broad-leafed Galatian spurge. Galachus spurge apparently, and is pest-free, disease-free, and requires very little pruning, though it is highly toxic. So just keep that, if any of you want to grow any plants. And number 6, the last one, which is the nice like little blue flower, bluey purple flower, that's called a slender speedwell, and though it may be pretty, it is a weed that's almost impossible to kill using weed killers. Prevention is better than a cure for this one, so watch out for that one. So I wonder how you did. I wonder if you got 6 out of 6 on your weed test, or if maybe you need to brush up a bit on your weeds. And I think it's just very interesting that sometimes we can't tell what are weeds and what aren't. So bear this in mind for what we're going to talk about today. So the parable of the weeds, which is what we're going to talk about, uses this agricultural narrative to help us get to grips with the idea of dealing with the problem of bad among the good in the world. So the parable is taken from Matthew, and is 13:24 to 30, and then skips a little bit and then goes 36 to 43, and it's actually called A Story About Wheat and Weeds. And it says, "Then Jesus told them another story. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who planted good seed in his field. That night, when everyone was asleep, his enemy came and planted weeds among the wheat and then left. Later, the wheat grew and the heads of grain grew, but the weeds also grew. Then the man's servant came to him and said, 'You planted good seed in your field. Where did the weeds come from?' The man answered, 'An enemy planted weeds.' The servant asked, 'Do you want us to pull up the weeds?' The man answered, 'No, because when you pull up the weeds, you might also pull up the wheat. Let the weeds and the wheat grow together until the harvest time. At harvest time, I will tell the workers, first gather the weeds and tie them together to be burnt. Then gather the wheat and bring it to my barn.'" Then skips a little bit and we move on to 36, and it says, Jesus explains about the weeds. "Then Jesus left the crowd and went into the house. His followers came to him and said, 'Explain to us the meaning of the story about the weeds in the field.' Jesus answered, 'The man who planted the good seed in the field is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seeds are all of God's children who belong to the kingdom. The weeds are those people who belong to the evil one, and the enemy who planted the bad seed is the devil. The harvest time is the end of the world, and the workers who gather are God's angels. Just as the weeds are pulled up and burnt in the fire, so it will be at the end of the world. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will gather out his kingdom all who cause sin and who do evil. The angels will throw them into the blazing furnace, where the people will cry and grind their teeth with pain. Then the good people will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. You people who can hear me, listen." Once again, there is obviously a wealth of stuff in there to sink our teeth into. But what the parable itself clearly tells us is that the kingdom of God must contend with evil all around it, and that God allows evil and good to coexist until the very end. And I've added in a little link if you kind of didn't really get the story. There's a really lovely little video, cartoon video that explains that very quickly and very briefly. So if you want to have a look at that, there's a little link below. The parable both guides and encourages us, as it seems to say we don't need to get out the weeds, or de-weed we might say, but that God will deal with the weeds in the harvest. Like the sower, he doesn't rip them out, but deals with them when the harvest comes. Jesus mentions that for a weed in its early stages closely resembles wheat, making it impossible to identify. That's a really interesting link to our quiz earlier, not being able to identify maybe what is a flower and what is a weed. As the plants mature, the roots of the weeds and the wheat interweave, making them almost impossible to separate. Any attempt to pull the weeds will also then pull the wheat. It's never easy to understand how and why God does not intervene to remove the weeds that makes the life of the wheat so difficult. Yet God, in his wisdom, lets them grow together. Sometimes when we look at what disturbs us in our world, the corruption, the injustice, the damage to the environment, it's hard to understand why evil should coexist with good, but that we must ask God for the wisdom and the courage to deal with them as He does. We can get frustrated and baffled by the presence of evil in our midst. I mean, it's one of the biggest questions that people ask us. I don't know about you, but I always get asked, why do bad things happen to good people, or why do bad things happen? But in this parable, Jesus tells us that this is the work of the enemy. The struggle between good and evil is to the death. But we can be rest assured that God will have the last word. It is never easy to believe this, for often there is evidence, or evidence points kind of in other directions, but we must have faith. It's sometimes hard to tell what are weeds and what are not. And it's not our job to try and work that out, and certainly not our role to weed out what we think are bad ones. That is God's role. So I hope we've given you some food for thought this week. I hope it's maybe just shone a bit of a different spin on the growing with the weeds. And we hope that you have a really happy Sunday, and hope that you can brush up on some of your weedness and learn your weeds if you didn't do too well in that quiz. So we hope you have a really happy Sunday, and stay safe and stay well, and we will see you next week. Bye.